Hey guys! We are doing this on my page this time instead of on the Epping Chicago page because for whatever reason, we're having some connectivity issues to the server that I guess the Epping Chicago page is attached to, but not my page. So hopefully that problem gets fixed by the next time we do this. So, yeah. But welcome to everybody who's just popping in. Thank you for making the trip over. We will start at the usual time. So, time to get your snacks, get your beverages. Spread the word. I know I shared on my page, on the Epping Chicago page. I shared in the Mysterians group. So, whoever you think needs to know, let them know that the presentation is here and unfortunately not on the Epping Chicago page. Do you guys like my mug? It says twat on it. I see a few of you in there. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Hopefully we get a few more people in. I anticipate as soon as 7 o'clock rolls around and they see that notice on the Epping Chicago page, more people will join in. My cat is screaming from the other room. Mordred! He's being a little brat today. And like many of you, I am just getting over some kind of cough nastiness. So we're drinking peppermint tea today. We're enjoying some cough drops. Hopefully my voice holds it together. Hey Eleanor, good to see ya. I'm gonna give it another extra couple minutes before I fully start on this one today, just to make sure that anybody who's coming over from the Epping Chicago page makes it over here. Hi, Kath. Oh, that's not Mordred. That is a pillow that a friend got me for Christmas, and I love it. It's now part of our couch decor. Excuse me. I would be very surprised if Mordred decided to sit behind me on these things, because he's not the biggest fan of the camera. He's gotten used to me taking like still pictures of him, but is still not the biggest fan of me having him in front of a recording camera. Hey, Julianne. Thank you so much, Eleanor. Appreciate it. Hi, Timberly. I'm glad that people have been seeing the message, because, yeah, I, for 20 minutes, was trying to connect to the Epping Chicago server, and for some reason it just wasn't doing it. Yeah, I'll give everybody an extra minute or two to get in before we really get going here. Hi, Janice. I see Joanne's here. Hi, Joanne. Awesome. Glad you guys saw it. Is anyone else dealing with, coughing crud? Hey, Delphina. Hi, Betsy. Good to see ya. Good. I'm glad so many of my regulars are here. That means my message made it out. Hi, Eileen. gonna give everything maybe another minute before we go ahead and get started. Yeah, mine for some reason is very dry too. Like I don't have a lot of like just like a little bit like right here in my nose, um, but not a ton of congestion and not a lot of like the gross stuff that we normally get with being sick. It's a lot of dry nose and dry throat. Hey Pat, good to see ya. Oof, that's a rough December. Hey Karen. Oh wow, you remember it. That's awesome. 1989 is when he got the chair, and that was 1 year before I was born, so I missed the whole thing. Glad to see so many people popping in. Oh, be nice to see you. Not old, just mature. All right. So, we are going to go ahead and get started because we have a doozy of a case that we're going to be dealing with today. Welcome to the effing Chicago, like taking a little vacation over to Mandy Crypt. Love to have you here. Now, if you have never seen an effing Chicago presentation before, love to have you guys. Effing Chicago is a collective of tour guides behaving badly. This means that you're going to get all the same awesome and amazing content you get from any other content creator, except I am going to swear and talk about whatever the fuck I want. Today, I decided to go full Nightmare Before Christmas and wear my Sally sweater and little choker here. And today we are going to be talking about the infamous, the disgusting Ted Bundy. But before we get into that, just a couple of quick things. First of all, I want to give a quick shout out to all of my Crypt Keepers on Patreon. These are my top tier folks. Betsy, Kath, Courtney, Donna, Eleanor, Gail, Jean, Joanne, Kathleen, Katie, Libby, Luann, Lucian, Megan, Mona, Pat, and Tom. Thank you all so much for everything you do. I literally could not do this shit without you guys, because you do keep me afloat. And before we get like really into the meat of this, I do want to say for the record, this is going to be a rough one. We're going to be talking about, not just murder, but sexual assault. We're going to be talking about, like, beatings. We're going to be talking about all kinds of gnarly shit. So if you are under the age of 18, highly encourage that you talk to your parents about watching this. If you are over the age of 18, know now that that's what we're talking about, so do not come for me if you don't like what you're about to hear. So, with that being said, let's get into it. So, Ted Bundy. He is a pretty infamous serial killer. And honestly, it is shocking how much he was able to get done in such a short amount of time. And we know for sure at this point he killed about 30 people. That is what he confessed to. We can only definitively connect him to less than that, a little over a dozen people. But he would say later on that, and not directly, by the way, he would blame an entity or make a theoretical case for some unknown assailant, that there could be anywhere between 100 and 300 victims. It's really hard to tell with Ted Bundy because of the nature of who he chose, the places he's committing these crimes, and the places that he would dump these people's bodies. But before he became, this nightmare monster. Theodore Robert Cowell was born to Eleanor Louise Cowell on November 24th, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. Um, Now, you read that correctly, or you heard that correctly. Cowell was his birth name because he was an illegitimate child. Um, Elizabeth Lundholm for unwed mothers is where he was actually born. So, Louise, because his mother went by Louise, she never really appreciably explained who his father was, never told anybody. She came up with like a couple of different stories about who exactly this was, but none of them have been confirmed. So we really don't know who his father is. And this definitely put a bit of a wedge between the two of them. This is something he never really forgave her for. But at the same time, he would come to like, in a way, idolize his mother. It's a very interesting relationship between the two of them. Now, at first, Louise was not actually intending on keeping Theodore. She was planning on leaving him at the home and adopting him out because she is a young, unwed mother. But her father, Samuel Cowell, insisted that she bring this child home and they raise him as part of the family. For the first 3 years of his life, Ted lived with his mother and his grandparents. And for a time, it's believed that he thought his grandparents were actually his parents and his mother was his sister. And it's very hard to pin down exactly when he learns the truth about his parentage. There's a few different stories about, how this went down, that he learned in childhood, that he learned as a teenager or as an adult, because he would tell a couple of different stories and the family would tell a couple of different stories. So very hard to say. Personally, I think he knew rather young because, I mean, his mother remarried, had other children, and he was living with his mother for, pretty much all of his young adult life. Or sorry, young life and then his early adult life. So for the first 3 years, he's living with his grandparents and his mother, and the dynamics of this home is also very hard to decipher because Ted would go back and forth and say that Samuel was at times super abusive and an angry, bitter man. And then another time said that he idolized him, that he was a wonderful man, somebody he looked up to. Neighbors and family friends and other members of the family would say that there was nothing wrong with this family. They were normal. There was a happy childhood. And other family members would say that Samuel used to beat his daughters regularly. So, very hard to say for sure what's going on in this house. But what we do know is that there was a little bit of tension in this house, at the very least. Now, towards kind of coming into his toddler years, in 1950, Louise actually changes her surname. She decides to change her surname to Nelson, and she also moves Ted and herself away from the East Coast and moves all the way to Tacoma, Washington to live with some of their cousins. So basically, she's starting out, brand new life, brand spanking new name, and people can kind of like forget about the fact that she was an unwed mother where she grew up. Now, 1951, Louise meets and will eventually marry John Culpeper Bundy, and they marry later on that year. This is where Ted Bundy got his name from. John did actually formally adopt Ted, and he tried to make him feel included in the family. Louise and John here, they would go on to have 4 more children. So Ted always felt like an outsider in his own family, but that was more on him than anything else. Because John would take him fishing, take him out for rides, teach him stuff. He really tried to be a father. But Ted was having none of it. He knew that his father wasn't his father. He found him to be dumb and dull, and he would talk smack about him all the time. They did not get along. And a lot of it was because Ted just could not accept him as a father or stepfather. Now, Louise, on the other hand, would say that she thought he was a perfectly normal boy, a perfectly normal, active boy, and he was the perfect son. And that's really gross considering what he does later on. She will defend him literally until his dying breath, even when it became clear that you couldn't ignore his crimes anymore. Now, Ted also would tell different stories about having a normal and happy childhood, and then also being left to his own devices and being ignored a lot. Um, that is something that is really common with Ted Bundy stories. He's always trying to control the narrative, and he's going to tell you a different story based on what kind of reaction he thinks you're going to get, what kind of reaction he wants to get at that any given time. He told his biographers that he would begin to fantasize about women at a very young age. He liked to search dumpsters for like nude pictures or pornographic magazines, and he became a peeping tom at a young age. But to other people, he would say that he was perfectly normal, perfectly fine, had no problems. Excuse me. Told you, this cough, man. Let's hope we get through this. So, he's not going to tell us a straight story. It's very hard to decide what is the truth, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of all of his stories. Now, neighbors would describe Ted as a bully and mean-spirited, which is very far from the, perfect son that Louise claimed he was. One of his neighbors would say that Ted was just different. He compensated for not fitting in with his peers by bullying and terrorizing the younger children, building tiger traps in the woods near their house, and trying to hunt and hurt the other kids. And she said that as he got older, he was obsessed with the idea of becoming somebody. Oh, excuse me. Now, Ted, again, is going to tell different stories about his high school career. He would say that he chose to be a loner at some points, and then others said that he was a popular and one of the boys kind of guy. So generally, a lot of people considered him to be very middle of the pack. Because he did have friends in high school who kind of came out of the woodwork later. He did have people in the neighborhood who talked about him as a high school student. In general, he's very average. Now, 1965, he graduates, and he started his long-term collegiate career. He will have periods where he's kind of in and out of college. At first, he attends the University of Puget Sound for a year, and then he transfers to the University of Washington, where he began studying Chinese and psychology. And then 2 years after that, 2 years after he graduates high school, and he's in the middle of college, he meets Diane Edwards. That's the gal with her eyes blocked out. She's a fellow student, and she's a little bit ahead of him in school. And he would later say that Diane was the only woman I ever loved. And it did seem like she had a very profound effect on him, but probably not in the way that we want. It became very clear that his obsession with women really grows at this point. Now, she was from a very wealthy family, very comfortable. Her family were socially and politically and professionally networked. They had lots of connections, and she was a very driven, motivated person. She graduated in 1968, and then she moved to San Francisco, where her family was from. In 1968, Ted drops out, and he begins working minimum wage jobs, and he's trying to get involved in local politics. Excuse me, like 1 second. My nose, man. All right, so she's very driven, and he's getting out of school without a degree. He's kind of floundering at this point. But while he's looking into politics, he decides he's going to join Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign. He becomes a volunteer for his campaign. He's a little aimless beyond that, and so Diane breaks up with him in the summer of 1968 because she said that he lacked maturity and ambition. Ted was very heartbroken over this. He traveled around for a little bit at the end of the summer and into the early fall. He would actually go back to the East Coast to visit with some of his family, and he enrolled in Temple University in Philadelphia, but didn't actually take any classes. And he said that he would also travel often to New York City, where he became obsessed with specifically very violent pornography. Now, in the fall of 1969, he returns to Washington, where he meets his long-term girlfriend, Liz Klopfer. She was a single mom and a secretary at the University of Washington. This relationship was very, very toxic, very on again, off again. And this relationship gave him like a mask of normality. Like he used her and her child and their connection with him as a way to kind of hide what he was doing. Because monsters don't have normal relationships, they don't have normal family lives. That's what a lot of people think, but he was able to maintain virtually a double life here, and she was very key to that. Now, I do want to stress she was not directly involved in any of these things. She had suspicions later on, but she was not involved whatsoever. And she didn't know exactly what was going on, but she did have suspicions that something was up with him. Now, at the time, she had a daughter who was, quite young at the time. Her daughter was named Molly, and he would come to be sort of a father figure to her. But she also said that when she was about 7 years old, he began to, physically and sexually abuse her, and luckily that stopped when she was 10, because when she was 10, that is when he was officially arrested and taken out of her life. Now, again, Liz didn't know any of that. So, I feel very badly for Liz. Like, Liz had a really rough time with all of this, and a lot of people, looked on her very hard and harshly. I don't. I don't look at her very harshly. She came from, rough circumstances, and she just kind of fell into other rough circumstances. Ted would describe his relationship with Liz as, "I loved her so much it was destabilizing," but also noted that they had very little in common. And this was a boon for him, because he could, disappear for days at a time, months at a time, keeping like a long-term relationship. And there wasn't a whole lot of demands for him. And he was able to, like I said, use this relationship as a mask. Now, 1970, Ted enrolls in the University of Washington again, this time to study psychology. And he becomes much more focused. He graduates with honors in 1972. And then after he graduates, he joins Governor Daniel Evans's re-election campaign. And people who worked with him would say that he was a very nice young man. One guy even said, "the kind of guy that you would like your sister to marry," which, knowing what we know now, you don't want your sister anywhere near this guy. Because he's likely to, kill her in the woods. Now, at this point, he has been able to learn how to blend. He's been able to learn how to fit in certain spheres. He fits in very well with politicians and the surrounding social circle there. Governor Evans appoints him to be part of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee, and he also becomes the assistant to Ross Davis, who's the chairman of the Republican Party. So he's doing pretty well for himself right now, and he loves the attention, the access that this gives him. He reveled in being able to get into spheres that he otherwise was, barred from. It also allowed him to create and promote a very specific image of himself that allowed people to see and respect him, but he didn't have to be real about it. He didn't have to show his real person or his real colors. In 1973, despite having very low LSAT scores, he was accepted into the University of Puget Sound's law school, and he was also accepted into the University of Utah. And he did so because he was able to get recommendation letters, not just from Governor Evans, but from other people that he had worked with and some of his earlier professors. They said that, he was a great student, maybe not the best test taker, but he was a great student, very focused, very highly driven, and he would make a good lawyer. So he did actually get into school. And very quickly, he also realizes that because he's still in school, he is, he's wanting more from his life. He's trying to be somewhat normal at this point. Now, in the summer of 1973, he hasn't quite picked a school yet. He's still thinking about it, but he's able to reconnect with Diane on a road trip. And she was very surprised by his transformation, the fact that he very quickly was able to kind of put himself on a very productive and successful path. And they start dating again. Mind you, he is still dating Liz Klopfer at this point. So he's got two girlfriends in different states because, Diane lives in California and Liz lives in Washington. And these women know nothing about each other. But also, once he's got his shit together, he realizes he's going to go to the University of Puget Sound. But while he's in school, he's not able to give Diane the kind of life that she had been accustomed to. So he starts to stress out a little bit, thinking about how he's going to pull this off. Ted will start to pull away from her in January of 1974. And eventually, he stops answering all her phone calls, stopped answering her letters. At one point, she called him and was like, "Hey, what the fuck, dude?" And he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about," and like just hung up on her. Basically, a lot of people think that this was him going after a woman who had initially rejected him and making her fall for him, and then cutting her off just because. You all right, bro? My brother knocked stuff over in the kitchen. So yeah, so he pulls away from her in January of 1974, and at that point, he is not quite sure where to go from here in like his personal and professional life. By April of 1974, Ted drops out of college, and this is really the time that his shit really ramps up. Now, it's really hard to decide whereabouts his crime spree begins, but it actually starts before this point. It starts before 1974. Now, the first that we can like really definitively point to actually happens January 14th, 1971. This is not a murder. This is a brutal attack. He breaks into the basement apartment of a woman named Karen Sparks and attacks her. She's a student at the University of Seattle. She was studying science, and she was 18 years old at the time. When he broke into her apartment, she was asleep, and he broke a piece of like rod off of her bed frame, beat her unconscious with it, and then used that to sexually assault her. This caused massive internal damage. She was left bleeding out in her bed for like 20 hours before her roommates found her. And she luckily survived this attack, but she had really gnarly lasting effects from this. And, still has chronic issues. She's still alive today, last I heard. Now, the next one that we can actually point to is a few years later in February 1st, 1974. Just before he drops out of his college career, he commits his first murder that we know of. This is Linda Ann Healy. Linda was a University of Washington student studying psychology, and she was actually set to graduate at the end of that semester. She was a very popular student, very active in her, school. She was 21 years old. Ted broke into her basement apartment and beat her unconscious while she slept. He then took off her bloody nightgown and hung it up in her bedroom closet, and also redressed her in street clothes, which is really unusual. But this is something that we find he does pretty regularly, where he will like play with the corpse, treating it almost like a doll. He talks about this later on in interviews that he does. But yeah, so he takes off her nightgown, redresses her in street clothes, and then he makes her bed, covering up all of the blood, so that way her roommates don't suspect anything until much later. But her absence was noted immediately. They finally searched her room and found the bloody sheets, the bloody nightgown. They report her missing on February 2nd. Now, unfortunately, she's already dead, and her partial remains are not recovered until March of 1975. They are found in a place called Taylor Mountain. Now, March 12th, 1974. That's our next one. Ted abducts and rapes and murders Donna Gail Manson. She often went by her middle name, Gail. She was a student at Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. She was a 19-year-old freshman. She was described as kind of goth. She was very interested in the supernatural, in the occult, and topics that dealt with death. She had walked across campus heading to a jazz concert when Ted abducted her. Now, initially, people were not super concerned by her disappearance. People knew that... Oh, hi, buddy. We have a visitor. We'll see how long he stays. For those of you who aren't aware, this is the cat Mordred who was screaming earlier.
Andy's gone.
Andy's gone. So yeah, people thought she was just kind of taking time for herself. She did have a history of like mild depression. She was prone to kind of like dip out for a day or two, but if she was gone longer than a few days, people got concerned, and she was gone longer than a few days in this case. After 3 days, her roommates reported her missing. Now, later on, Ted would claim that he burned her skull in Liz's fireplace, and the rest of her remains were left on Taylor Mountain, but her remains have actually never been found, unfortunately. By April of 1974, Ted completely drops out of school because he's now focused on murder like 24/7. He's basically going to kill somebody every month this year. Now, April 17th, 1974, Susan Elaine Rancourt is abducted by Ted as she is leaving her advisors meeting at the Central Washington State College. And she's also on her way to a movie, a late night movie. That movie was supposed to start at about 11 p.m., I believe. She was abducted between 10:30 and 11. And she was studying biology at this point. She was an excellent student. She had a 4.0 GPA. She was 18 years old, very, very driven, very dedicated to her studies. And she was a very well-liked girl. Now, when she hadn't shown up by 3 a.m. back at her house, her roommate actually alerted the dormitory's manager, and they would actually report Susan missing. Now, after that, word of her disappearance got out rather quick, and 2 other girls came forward to say that a strange man who was wearing a sling asked them to help him carry books to his car. They had agreed, but both of them were very creeped out by him and the state of his car. He was driving a brown VW Bug. They noticed some things about the car that were weird, like how there wasn't a passenger seat in the car. So they ran before they got too close to the car and managed to survive. Ted would later confirm that this is how he routinely lured people back to his car. He would pretend to have some kind of disability, like, you know, using crutches, wearing a cast, wearing a sling, and get them to carry things to his car. And then when they were distracted, he would bludgeon them over the head. And that's what he did with her. He got her to the car, and he bludgeoned her with a crowbar that he hid in his passenger side car. And then he took her to Taylor Mountain, where he would rape and strangle her and beat her. Her partial remains would be recovered in March of 1975, along with several others. Now, while all this is going on, Ted is still working with the Seattle Crime Prevention Agency, and he even wrote a pamphlet on rape prevention. Spoiler alert, best way to prevent a rape? Don't be a fucking rapist. That's the best way. But yeah, no, he would write a pamphlet on, like, how to prevent a rape or how to prevent yourself from getting raped, which is just wild to me. Now, the other thing he was doing is he becomes part of the Department of Emergency Services, and he joins a team that was specifically built to actually find these missing college girls. So he is knowing everything that the cops know. And he's able to stay like 3 steps ahead of the law enforcement and what they know. He's able to kind of steer the investigation a little bit and kind of fly under the radar. And that's really wild to me. He also meets a woman named Carol Ann Boone, who's a divorced mom of 2. And they have a close relationship. I'm not entirely sure if they dated during this point, but they stay very close. And she becomes instrumental in his defense later on. She will later regret that, by the way. Now, the next victim, unfortunately, is Roberta Parks. She disappears from her Oregon State University dorm area in... Hang on one second. Because I forgot to write the date on here because I'm silly. It's May. So in May of 1974. She disappears from Oregon State University. She's on her way to meet friends at the local cafe for, I've seen some that said ice cream and some that said coffee. She was 22 years old. She loved to write in her spare time and described as a very kind soul. She also had a history of depression, and she recently broken up with her boyfriend. And on top of that, she had gotten into a phone conversation argument with her father just hours before he had had a heart attack. Now, he survived, but she blamed herself for the heart attack. So she's having a rough time. Ted would later confirm that he lured her to come with him by asking her out on a date to a bar. And then once she was in his car, he tied her up, gagged her, and drove her across state lines into Washington. He said he raped her twice before he took her up to Taylor Mountain and murdered her, probably by strangling. And her partial remains were recovered in March of 1975. The next one, unfortunately, is Brenda Carroll Ball, June 1st, 1974. She disappears from the parking lot of Twin Flame Tavern. She was in a period of transition. She was also described as a free spirit. She had been going to community college for a little bit. She had had a job, but, she's trying to find herself. So she dropped out of school, she quit her job, and she takes up partying for a little bit. She wants to, sow her wild oats a little bit. She's given herself time to have some fun before she settles down. Now, unfortunately, this does not go well for her. She's 22 years old at this point, and she has come out for that evening to watch a band play at this dive bar. And unfortunately, her friends leave her there. She doesn't have a ride home. She'd even asked one of her friends who was in the band if they could give her a ride, and they couldn't, unfortunately, for some reason. So she starts to hitchhike. And Ted confirms that he picked her up hitchhiking from the parking lot. Now, he would claim that they had consensual sex, and that wasn't enough for him. He couldn't possess her that way. So he strangled her in his bed while she slept, and that did it for him. Somehow, she makes it to Taylor Mountain, and her partial remains are also found on Taylor Mountain in March of 1975. But when he says that he strangled her and nothing more, that doesn't explain why her skull had such significant damage to it. She had lots of fractures on her skull, indicating that he beat the shit out of her. But he never fully explained why that was. Now, just 10 days later, June 11th, 1974, Georgianne Hawkins disappears from a well-lit alleyway between her boyfriend's fraternity dorm and her sorority. Georgianne was a very active, very popular student. She was a star athlete in high school. She was very dedicated to her studies. She was a student at the University of Washington. She had joined the Kappa Alpha Theta sorority, and she wanted to work in journalism. Now, she was coming back from a party that evening, but she had stopped at her boyfriend's because she wanted to say goodnight to him, and she also wanted to pick up study materials from a friend of theirs who had been borrowing her Spanish notes. Now, this alleyway literally is less than a block from where her sorority house is, and all the students often used that alleyway to get in and out. Now, one of her friends was also waiting for her at the dorm, so when she didn't arrive by 3 a.m., everybody noticed that she was missing, and everybody was scared. So she was known right away to be missing. She was reported missing immediately. And while normally police wouldn't, take it too seriously if it hadn't been 24 hours, due to the fact that there were tons of girls who were now missing, they hopped on this right away. And on top of that, Georgianne's family were very well connected. Georgianne's family was a very prominent family, and they really got the word out about their daughter missing. Witnesses would come forward to tell the police about a man that they had seen that day walking around on crutches with a cast on, asking for help carrying a briefcase to his car. And there were people who had agreed, and just like the previous case, they got creeped out by him and his car, and they ran off before they could, he could beat them to unconsciousness. But he would confirm later, Georgianne helped him to his car, and he bludgeoned her in that parking lot and shoved her in his car. He drove her to Issaquah, Washington, where he strangled her. And he said that he revisited her body multiple times and then decapitated her. And when I say revisited, it's just as gross as you think it is. He was a necrophiliac. Now, while he would not actually come right out and say it, that he did it, he would explain through the third person that this entity who did this was a necrophiliac. And this entity was him. So the next day, after he kills Georgianne, he returns to the campus just to make sure he didn't leave anything, and he did leave stuff. He picked up evidence right from underneath the cop's nose. There were cops there looking around in the daylight for evidence, and he managed to get out of there with one of her earrings and a couple of other little pieces of evidence that was left behind in the parking lot with no one questioning him, which is very lucky for him and very unfortunate for Georgianne. Her remains have never been recovered, although Ted claims that some of the unknown and unidentified bones that were found later on with other victims were her bones. They have never been identified. So she still remains a missing person, but it's a very cold case. It's generally assumed that Ted was her killer. Now, by this point, people are terrified. Hitchhiking drops dramatically. Police are under high pressure, but this is happening across many different jurisdictions, and not every jurisdiction is willing to work with the other. So they're having a hard time piecing everything together. They're having a hard time communicating. And mind you, this is happening before we have, nationwide databases that every cop has access to where they can compile data on similar crimes. So he's working under the best conditions for a serial killer. Now, unfortunately, just taking one person is not enough for him. He gets bolder. July 14th, 1974 is what I refer to as the double event. He abducts, rapes, and murders Janice Ott and Denise Naslund. This is a very crowded day at Lake Sammamish State Park where people are enjoying the good summer weather. There were literally thousands of people at this park that day. Janice Ott was one of them. She was a 23-year-old married probation caseworker working for King County Juvenile Court. Her husband was actually away on work for several months, so she was hanging out with friends. She was living with friends at the time. But she decided to have some me time. She decided to have some alone time at the park. So she went sunbathing for the day. She rode her bike to the park. And she was enjoying the day before Ted came. Now, Denise was a 19-year-old student studying computer programming, and she was at the park having a picnic with her boyfriend, their dog, and another couple. And what's interesting is that Denise and Janice knew each other very in passing, because Janice had at one point dated Denise's brother, but they weren't really close. This was not they weren't besties or anything, but these women knew each other. So it's wild that he managed to catch these two girls. Now, Janice was pulled away by a handsome man wearing a white tennis outfit and a cast. He had asked her if she would help him hitching a sailboat from his car. And this was around noon that day. Denise, at around 4:30 that evening, gets into an argument with her boyfriend, and she decides she's going to get up, go to the bathroom by herself. But she takes her dog with her. This bathroom was not far away from the picnic area, but nobody actually saw Ted abduct Denise. But it's assumed that he pulled the same trick, showed up wearing a cast, asked for help, and because she was a kind person, she went and did, tried to help him. Both were noticed missing immediately. Later on, 4 women would come forward to say that they had had a similar experience with a man that looked like this. This is the composite sketch put together for the Lake Sammamish disappearances. They described a handsome man wearing a white tennis outfit, wearing a cast, asking for help with a sailboat. One of them had actually freaked out because when they got to his car, and she's like, "Where's your sailboat, dude?" He's like, "Oh yeah, no, it's at my parents' house. We gotta go get it." So she knew right away this was not a good situation, and she literally ran away from him. He would come out and say later that he raped one of the girls and had the other one watch, and then he killed both of them. 3 people, including Liz Klopfer, recognized Ted from the sketch, and all of them called to report him. Liz in particular said that she knew that he liked to stalk young women, that at one point she had found a bag full of women's clothing that did not belong to her. He had kept plaster of Paris around. And she couldn't verify his whereabouts on many of the evenings in which women disappeared. He was briefly looked at, but because he had no criminal record before that point, and he was literally working with law enforcement, they didn't give it a second glance and kind of, blew right over him. And they also were like, he's a clean cut law student. What harm could he be? Still, things are getting hot in the Pacific Northwest, so he's deciding it's now time to make a move. He's got to get out of here for a little bit. That brings us to, Ted getting an acceptance letter in August of 1974. He's accepted into the University of Utah Law School, and he decides he's going to move to Salt Lake City, but he still maintains a long-distance relationship with Liz and Molly. Molly is the girl whose eyes are blacked out in this picture here. Now, very quickly, he has trouble acclimating to his new circumstances. He realizes that he's actually a little bit behind because despite him being a pretty good student at this point, his peers are surpassing him and he's not able to keep up. He also is just like in a very different social climate, and he's feeling inadequate. So very soon, disappearances and murders start happening in Utah as well. Now, despite that, he claims to love Utah. He claimed to love the scenery. I think he liked how remote a lot of places in Utah are. I mean, Utah's got a lot of beautiful scenery, don't get me wrong, but I think he liked it for very different reasons. Now, sadly, September 1974, the skeletal remains of Janice Ott and Denise Naslund are found, along with vertebrae of an unknown, unidentified woman, which a lot of people believe belonged to Georgianne Hawkins. But, again, those remain unidentified officially. Now, October 1st, 1974, 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox is abducted from a poorly lit roadway in Holiday, Utah. Nancy had been going through a rough time. She had been sexually assaulted over the summer, but her assaulter never got any crime, or he never got arrested. He never did any time, and some people didn't believe that she had been assaulted. She had previously been doing pretty well in school, but after this, she gets involved in many arguments with her dad, especially her dad. But there's tension between both parents, and she's having trouble in school. She's, skipping school a lot, or when she's in school, she's not paying attention. And I can understand, because if you were sexually assaulted and people were saying, oh, you didn't actually get assaulted, you might have some trouble focusing in school as well. So because she's having trouble with her parents, she's dating a boy that they don't like very much, and that boy's mom doesn't like her very much. So they strive to keep them apart. Now, initially she's regarded as a runaway because of the tensions in the house. Her case will go cold until Ted confesses. Her parents fully believed that she was taken. She was not actually a runaway. They believed that she had been abducted, and they were correct. Ted will confess to her murder after he's arrested. He said he picked her up, drove her to a fruit orchard where he raped and strangled her, and then dumped her body in Capitol Reef National Park, but unfortunately her remains have yet to be discovered. Now, October 18th, 1974, 17-year-old Melissa Smith disappears after leaving the Pepperoni Pizza Parlor in Midvale, Utah. She was the daughter of a Midvale police officer, so she had a better idea than most about what could happen if you were out and about alone. She was a little bit smarter about her surroundings, and she still got got. She had actually been having dinner with some friends, and then she was going to go back home, pack a bag, and then go visit another friend for a sleepover, but she never made it home. October 27th, her nude, battered body was found, and this is just 9 days later, on a hillside in Summit County. They found that she had been beaten, raped, sodomized, strangled with nylon stockings, and may have been alive for as many as 7 days before she was killed. So she was kept in his house for about a week, and he did horrible things to this girl. Ted would later confess to her murder and said that he had spent time with her body afterwards, dressing her, undressing her, putting makeup on, doing her hair. And this is something that he'll talk about later with other victims as well when he revisits their bodies. October 31st, 1974, so not even a month later, Laura Amy, she's hitchhiking after a Halloween party. She's a 17-year-old girl. She's from a well-off Mormon family, an accomplished equestrian, lover of animals, but she also had a tense relationship with her parents. And she wasn't living at home at the time. She was kind of bouncing around between a couple different friends. But she had remained in contact with her family. Her mother begged her not to hitchhike, to always get a ride from somebody you know. But she said, Mom, it's okay. Don't need to worry about me. And that's exactly what happened. She hitchhiked, and she hitchhiked with the wrong guy. Her mother at first, or her parents at first, didn't really notice her missing right away. It had taken a few days, because while she was in contact, like I said, she wasn't living at home. But when she missed showing up for a hunting trip that she was supposed to go on, because she actually hunted with her family, they became very worried, and she was reported missing. Police were not helpful. They considered this to be a non-urgent issue. She was probably a runaway, and they kind of blew off the family. Unfortunately, on Thanksgiving Day, which is November 28th, 1974, her nude, battered body was found in American Fork Canyon in the Wasatch Mountains. Now, while she was nude, her hair and her makeup and her nails were done, just like a little doll. This, again, is something that he does. Her autopsy showed that she had probably died around November 20th. So it's likely that she was kept alive for, like, over 2 weeks. That she had been alive for 20 days. And I cannot imagine what this girl went through in 20 days. Like, that's horrifying. Now, like the other girls, she had been strangled to death with a nylon stocking. But she was very badly beaten. She had extensive injuries all over her body, including a fractured skull, broken jaw, and even gouges in her body, amongst cuts and bruises. He would confess to her murder shortly before his execution in 1989. The next one is November 8, 1974. This is the day that he attempts to abduct 18-year-old Carol DeRanche. And then after he is unsuccessful in this attempt, he successfully abducts Deborah Kent. So earlier in the day, Ted approaches Carol in Murray, Utah, at a mall. And he's posing as a police officer. He says he is Officer Roseland. And he said that somebody tried to break into her car and that she needed to come to the station with him to make a statement. He walks her to her car. She sees there's nothing wrong with it and then is like, do I really need to go in? And he urged her. He was like really insistent that she get into his car. And she thinks he's a cop. She's like, all right, fine. I'll go and I'll get in your car. She gets there and realizes it's a VW bug and is very confused. And he's still like being all confident. Excuse me. Oh, I'm just a whole mess today. So she's like, okay, I guess, gets in the car and is still feeling real hanky about the whole thing. Now that she's in the car with him, she's smelling alcohol on his breath. And she tries to escape. But he stops the car, tries to handcuff her, and luckily for her, she's able to get only one of those hands handcuffed. He actually will accidentally put both cuffs on one hand, and she's able to break out of the car and start running. He chases her with a crowbar, and luckily she avoids getting hit in the head, and she jumps into another passing vehicle, and she's able to escape. And he's now super pissed because not only did she get away, but she knows what he looks like. But he is not deterred. He's going to try again. Later that evening, he abducts 17-year-old Deborah Kent. She is in the parking lot of Viewmont High School in Bountiful, Utah. This is a short ride from Murray, only 20 miles. She is walking to the family car so she can pick up her brother from a skating rink. And she screams. People hear her, and they see a car tear acid out of the parking lot, but they don't see her getting got, and they don't see who got her. But she is noticed missing immediately. Police will actually recover a handcuff key that matches the handcuffs on Carol DeRanche's wrists. So this connects these two crimes. Ted will later confess that he took her back to his apartment for at least a day before killing her, and then dumping her body in the wilderness in Fairview, Utah, somewhere around that area. Sadly, only a single patella bone is all that has ever been recovered from her, and the family did have that tested. It was confirmed as her. November 1974, Liz calls the tip line again to report suspicions about Ted uh, because she's now seeing some of these disappearances. Oh, I should roll back. She sees some of the disappearances in Utah, connects them to the disappearances that have been happening in the Pacific Northwest. She notes the similarities, and this time the police take her a little bit more seriously. But 7 of the 8 witnesses who had given testimony to the police were not able to pick him out of a photo lineup. And this is something that was kind of interesting, is that based on how he wore his hair or his facial hair, he could look very different in many different pictures. That's what made it somewhat difficult for the police to kind of track him down. She calls it again in December to follow up, but there's no real movement on his case yet. Now, he's not idle. He's still doing stuff. January 1912, or sorry, January 12th, 1975, Ted snatches Karen Campbell as she is walking out of an elevator at a ski resort in Snowmass, Colorado. She was on vacation with her fiance and her fiance's kids, and she was just going back to the room to go get a magazine. But he snatches her literally in seconds, and her disappearance is noticed right away, but police are stumped. They searched every room in the resort. They searched all over the immediate area. There was no sign of her. But her body would be found February 6, 1975, nude, raped, and scavenged by animals because she was left in the snow. She had likely died the same day that she was abducted. And she was found, buried in snow. Now, sadly, March 15th, 1975, he does it again. Julie Cunningham was abducted from just outside of her apartment in Vail, Colorado. She was listed as a missing person, but her remains have never been found. This is not her. One of my pictures is missing. All right. Good to know. So Ted confesses to her abduction, saying that he had lured her to his car by wearing crutches and asking for help carrying a briefcase. He would bludgeon her, rape her, strangle her, and dump her body in a remote location somewhere around Rifle, Colorado, leaving her body in the desert. Which, tragic. It's absolutely tragic. Yeah, for some reason, some of my pictures ain't showing up. Well, March 1975, the skulls, hair, and mandibles of Linda Healy, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, and Brenda Ball were all discovered by forestry students on Taylor Mountain. The remains were found among clothing, jewelry, hair, and other debris that would identify these women, but most of them were identified using dental records. Sadly, he's still not stopping. Here's our actual next person. April 6, 1975, Ted abducts Denise Oliverson as she's riding her bike along the Colorado-Utah border. Now, she had had a fight with her husband, and she was going to go to her parents' house to cool off, but she never made it. Her bike and her sandals were found in a viaduct nearby, but her bodily remains have never been recovered. Ted confessed to her murder, saying that he dumped her body in the Colorado River, and that's why she was never found. Now, May 5th, 1975, Ted abducts 12-year-old Lynette Culver from her school in Pocatello, Idaho. Lynette was a very good kid, but she often skipped school because, who does like going to school at that age? Police suspected that she was a runaway due to her age, and the fact that she liked to skip school. But her parents were adamant that she was not one to run away. She would never have done that. And they were right. They knew their kid. Ted would later admit to abducting her right off the school campus as she was coming back from lunch. He took her to a hotel where he raped her and then drowned her in the hotel bathtub before dumping her body in the Snake River. Sadly, her remains have also never been recovered. June 28, 1975, Ted abducts, rapes, and then murders Susan Curtis. Susan, she had a very rough childhood. She had a very rough home life. She frequently ran away. She was often, gone for days or weeks at a time, but she always came back home. At this point, she was trying to reconcile with her family, and she was on a retreat for, youths in the Mormon church at Brigham Young University. And he abducts her as she's walking from a banquet hall. This is kind of like the formal end of conference dinner. She's going back to her dorm room because she wanted to brush her teeth. She had just gotten braces put on, and she wanted to make sure no food was stuck in it. She was getting used to those braces. 15 years old, brand new braces. Tells you how, like, the fact that he's picking up literal babies is, it's wild. Now, she was immediately reported missing. But because she was often a runaway, police considered this to be, a runaway situation as well. Now, her family didn't believe so because she had left everything behind. The only thing missing were the clothes and the shoes that she was wearing. Jewelry that was significant was left behind. All her clothes, everything was left behind in the dorm room. Ted would later confess to raping and abducting her, and he would give directions to where her body could be found, but either he misremembered or he deliberately gave the wrong directions because her remains have never been discovered. August 1975, Ted gets baptized in the Church of Latter-day Saints, and he and Liz are discussing marriage. So he's kind of moving on with his life, despite the fact that he's, living several states away. But while he's kind of planning a future with Liz, his name comes up in a compiled list of suspects in the disappearances between the Pacific Northwest and Utah, and police actually do start seriously investigating him. In August 16th, 1975, Ted is arrested by Utah State Patrol Officer Bob Hayward in Granger, Utah. The reason why is because Officer Hayward was, doing his patrol early in the morning, and at about 2 a.m., he finds Ted driving his car with the headlights off, and he finds that really suspicious. So he, puts his lights on, asks him to pull over, and Ted just books it. He runs. And that's a big problem. So he gives chase, and eventually Ted decides to pull over. So he's arrested right away for failure to stop for a police officer. And he lawyers up immediately. His lawyer gets him out on bail, but his car is searched. And this is what they find in the car. So everything in this image is real sus. Like, on their own, not that bad. Altogether, this is the perfect kit to rape somebody. They find flashlights, they find a ski mask, a nylon stocking mask, a crowbar, handcuffs, garbage bags, rope, an ice pick, and other burglary tools in a duffel bag. So this is his kit to go out and commit the crimes he does. They also found a brochure with Colorado ski resorts in it, with some of the pages earmarked, which happened to coincide with the girls in Colorado who went missing. His lawyer did get him out, but the cops put him on 24-hour surveillance because they know that this guy is real fucking suspicious. They had also searched his apartment while he was, in custody. They were looking for any kind of evidence, but he was pretty good at, cleaning up after himself. He did hide a bunch of Polaroids that he had taken because, I forgot to mention, up to this point, he was taking Polaroid pictures of his victims as he was doing things with them, both before, during, and after they died. So these would have been like a smoking gun. These would have been the nail in the coffin. But he managed to hide them well enough. The police didn't find them. But this spooked him. So when he got back out, he burned all of those Polaroids. So we don't actually know how many victims there were because one of the best pieces of evidence was destroyed by him. Now, his undoing is the fact that he sold his car. He was trying to get rid of it as evidence. September 1975, he sold his car to a Midvale teenager, and police immediately confiscated it and searched it. They found hairs that matched Karen Campbell, Melissa Smith, and Carol DeRange. The likelihood that these three women could have all left hairs just by happenstance in his car was so unlikely, it's astronomical. So, on October 2nd, 1975, they put Ted in a lineup, and Carol DeRange was able to pick him out of that lineup immediately. Ted was rearrested for the attempted abduction of Carol DeRange, and this is where the noose begins to tighten. And that, my friends, is where we will end. And we will pick this up again in part 2. But yeah, I forgot to make my little what's upcoming next thing. But the next thing that I'm going to be doing is a talk for Chicagoans on Tuesday. March 4th, I'm going to be talking about the DNC riots in 1968, the Democratic National Convention riots that happened in Chicago. Or a few days after that, I think about a week after that, I'm going to be doing part 2 of Ted Bundy. And then at the end of the month, at the end of March, I'm going to be talking about Richard Speck. So with that, that was a lot to handle in just one portion. And he's still not done with his crimes, ladies and gentlemen. Even though he's been arrested, he's still not done. So I cannot wait to tell the rest of the story, but I will head to the comments for all of our questions. Yeah, I'm sure the captions are real funny because my nose is now a little stuffy. Yeah, it's crazy to think that, like, you could just be living your life, having a me day, leaving your phone at home, and then somebody just comes along and snatches you, and then that's it. Like, it's crazy to think about. And yeah, no, none of this was national news until way later. This was all local news. So, like, each state knew what was happening and knew where these girls were, or like where they were being abducted from, and they knew all these crimes were happening, but they couldn't piece them all together. And because this is not national news, not a lot of other people are piecing this together. Damn, people were still thinking that he's a good guy to introduce your daughter to, even after he was arrested. Yikes. Yeah, no. One of the things I did note is because like I also like watched the Netflix series, the Ted Bundy tapes, and I had seen interviews he did. He was very eloquent and he was very like educated. He carried himself well, but man, once you see some of the bodies that were left behind, you don't want him meeting anybody you know and love. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, I did see that. I did see that he got married, and we'll talk about that in the next one. All right, guys. I'm going to log off. I'm going to take care of my voice. I will be taking this video and I will share it to the Effing Chicago page so that way it's up there for people to see. And this is one that I'm going to put up on my YouTube page later on. So, definitely keep an eye out, and I will post dates and everything coming up very soon for in-person things. I hope to see all of you guys, well, as many as I can, at the Speakeasy series for Chicagoans next week. And until then, I will see you all in the next video. Bye, guys. Have a good night.